It's like America is not a civil libertarian democracy. America is a Christian democracy. And it scares the pants off of me.
Welcome to Cross-Examined, a podcast about confronting difference in good faith. I'm Evan Mandery, and in each episode, my co-host, John Inazu, and I come at a divisive question from opposing viewpoints and work to understand each other more fully without giving up on the conversation. In episode 5, we dive into what it means to feel American, exploring how our freedoms compare to the past and how faith in the Constitution shapes our view of the country.
I do feel American. I don't know if I always love it, but I don't know how else to feel when I'm abroad, for example. I don't feel like a citizen of the world or a global citizen. I feel, although I am half white and half Japanese, I feel more not Asian in Asian countries than I do not white in white countries. But that's a different topic for a different day. Let's talk about being American. Evan, are you an American?
Yeah, I feel much less so than I used to. So I used to do this exercise with my classes where I'd have them put on index cards, identifications, right? Like whatever your religion is, race, favorite sports team, whatever is meaningful to you. And then I'd have them gradually surrender them until you're down to 3 and 2 and 1. So American would used to have been certainly would have been in my top 10, probably in my top 5. It's not anymore. And I feel vaguely ashamed to be an American now.
So what's the alternative for you? Are you an un-American or are you something else?
I don't know, an empiricist, a rationalist, a human being, part of my family.
No, but I don't actually. So I'm more interested in. I agree with you, and I like the discussion about other identity labels and situating yourself in other identities. But I'm curious specifically on where is your national or non-national loyalty and self-understanding?
Right. So I guess the way I'm interpreting that is why was I proud to be an American, and do I have a lot of reservations now, like kind of my understanding of what it meant to be an American? So I was very committed to. It's like, wow, this is like kind of a civil libertarian democracy, and I thought like there was very deep commitment to the First Amendment. I thought that there was net significant progress in racial equality. I wouldn't say we're anywhere near equal, but I thought that the arrow was pointing in the right direction. And I thought America, and I can imagine tons of pushback on this, but America did a lot of good in the international community. And like moved away from so much of that. So I guess I'm not prepared to be un-American, but I'm really worried, and I'm much less invested, much less convinced that the things that attached me to the American project are linking me to maybe the majority of Americans now. I don't know. If I could be replaced somewhere, it'd probably be someplace like Norway or Sweden, which has pretty, certainly much greater income equality, and feels to me like kind of a set of values that I get more. But no, I'm not prepared to. I'm glad that, women have reasonably equal status in the United States.
And relative to other countries, for all of our imperfections, we have aspired to and often realize due process of law in some form, and we don't have summary executions of, I think in other words, I have also, for I think very different reasons, probably growing skepticism about being an American, but I'm also still pretty glad at the end of the day that I live in this country and experience unbelievable freedoms that lots of people in the world don't get.
I don't know if I were a woman, if I'd feel super great about where the United States is right now. And I don't know if I were transgender. I don't know that I'd feel super comfortable here right now. And the due process commitment, it feels like it's eroded a tiny bit in the deportation context. So it's deeply worrisome to me. I still recognize that this is not Saudi Arabia.
Or 1920 America, right? I'd much rather be a woman today than in 1920. I'm sure glad to be a Japanese American in 2025 and not 1941.
Sure.
So in other words, there are a lot of, to me, real upsides about this country. I will say, when I was growing up, partially because my dad had been born in a prison camp for Japanese Americans, and so we were not a very Japanese family. We were very much a military family, and he was a career officer in the Army, and we lived on Army bases and did Army things, and we were very, military patriotism was how I experienced the world growing up, and that was a core part of, I think, my own self-understanding in the world. And then when I myself went to Duke on an ROTC scholarship and then served in the military and worked at the Pentagon, that was a big part of understanding things. And I think in as I've gotten older, I am more and more aware of the claims and allegiances that the nation asks of all of us, and how much I want to condition those upon other loyalties, including and principally my faith commitments. So I no longer take oaths. I don't.
Me neither.
I don't pledge allegiance to the flag.
Me neither.
And I think those are important, expressive and bodily enactments of what I believe my commitments to be. I still, as a veteran, I still think it's really important to honor and take seriously, particularly the sacrifices that so many service members have made. And so I will stand at attention during the Pledge of Allegiance and during the national anthem. I think I don't like, although, people can burn flags if they want, I don't like that kind of irreverence to the symbols that people have made extraordinary sacrifices for. But I also want to say that is not my primary commitment in life, and the nation often assumes it to be the primary commitment.
What is your family's history in the Japanese internment camp? So people may know this, but Korematsu versus the United States is one of the really ignominious decisions in American Supreme Court history that permitted that to happen. Does that make you feel net more hopeful and confident of buying into the American project, or does it make you more skeptical about the American project?
And what's the it?
That it happened, that internment happened and was deemed constitutional.
I'm only laughing because I don't know how that could be hopeful. It's extremely dark and bleak with massive direct consequences to my own family.
But you sounded 10% more positive about the American project, I think, than I did to my own ear.
Growing up, knowing about the experience of my grandparents and my dad has meant that I have always been suspicious of the people in power, whoever they are. And it's part of, I think, what drives my own commitment to civil liberties. You only need civil liberties when you're not in power.
Right.
And people have used power for extraordinarily bad ends, including, the architects of the internment, of the Japanese American imprisonment, were Earl Warren and Franklin Roosevelt, right? So I don't have much trust for those guys either, just as I don't trust really any of the people who are consolidating power and using it to their own ends at the expense of the civil liberties of people they don't like. So that's always in the background for me. But the other thing, and I've written about this in a couple of places, including my last book, but I'm deeply aware of the immense personal cost of that to my grandmother, my dad, the way it shaped the rest of his life. And I'm sure to some extent that I don't fully understand my own upbringing.
Yeah, I think that stuff travels through generations.
It does. Yeah. And so, no, that doesn't give me much optimism in the American experiment. But I'm not much of a progress narrative person, but I would much rather be here today than 1941. And I think that is a measure of progress.
However, I'd much rather be in 2015 than in 2025. I mean, we've backslid. And if you asked me, okay, I don't know exactly what the modern equivalent of, Japanese camps would be, but if you'd said to me 10 years ago, would the Supreme Court ever authorize that today? I would be like, in a million years, no. And like today, I'm like, I have no confidence in that whatsoever. So
wait, hold on. You have no confidence that the current U.S. Supreme Court would resist an effort to mass imprison people based on race?
Yeah.
I have absolute confidence that the Supreme Court would knock that down 10 times out of 10. There's not a doubt in my mind. So tell me about your lack of confidence. I mean, what would the reasoning be that would get 5 justices on the Supreme Court to back the mass imprisonment of people based on race under, let's say,
an articulation of threat to national security?
I don't see it. I think there are lots of reasons to be concerned with lots of parts of government, and a number of fair critiques you can make about the Supreme Court. But I actually think one of the really important things about the current moment is to be measured in critiques.
Well, I didn't say I was certain that it would get upheld.
No, that's true.
I just said, whereas, you're at 10 out of 10. I'm like, okay, 9.5 out of 10. But, the 0.5 worries me.
Okay, well, that's at least better than where I thought you were starting with that one.
Well,
So
I didn't say it. I just said I would have been completely confident in 2015 that nothing like that could ever happen. And I don't have complete confidence. I mean, it's hard to construct what that hypothetical is exactly, but I do feel like there could be an articulation of sort of exigent, whatever, an emergency. I'm not confident the court would resist it. I'm not certain the court would resist it.
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and we've talked before about the difference between confidence and certainty. So I guess I wouldn't weigh in for myself certainty about anything prospectively in the future. But as much as I'm confident about anything in life, I'm confident that the Supreme Court would not go anywhere near that. Having said that, I think there are lots of worrisome things that are happening right now, including things that are affecting civil liberties, and also that things could get a lot worse. 2015 is a marker in time. The consolidation of executive power over the past 5 administrations, which has gotten us to some of the mess we're in, is also worrisome. So maybe I'd back it up a bit. But the main point is, so back to sort of the American piece. I don't know. I think it's really important to recognize that this is and was a deeply flawed country run by deeply flawed human beings, and especially the ones who get power, we should be especially worried about, whoever they are.
Yeah.
And that there are some really good things that have happened and are happening in the world because of this country, which is not to say I don't buy into the narrative that there's this sort of like special transcendent grace on the United States. I think that's actually a theologically misguided view that a number of American Christians seem to hold right now. I think it's pretty evident that for people who profess faith in Christianity, that the pivot point of the Christian story is not the United States of America and not 2025. But
the pivot point of the Christian story is not the United States of America. But the pivot point of the history of the United States of America might be Christianity, right? Isn't that one of the major drivers of what's going on right now?
I think so. But say more about the possible pivot point. What do you mean by this?
Okay, so I'm not at any extreme, okay? And I'm not fatalistic about where we're heading. I don't think there's anything certain, but I'm deeply, deeply worried. And I think we have descended somewhat into some measure of authoritarianism, right? I mean, I feel like kind of the agenda that's being advanced is sort of a Christian white nationalist agenda. And I'm not saying that's everybody, but that certainly seems like the thrust of it to me. And, I'm not sure where we come out on the other end of it.
What's the agenda?
Well, the agenda is pretty well articulated in Project 2025. To the extent I understand the agenda, and I'm not an expert in it, but, I've read a fair amount. I mean, I think it's first of all, a nationalist agenda. So it's a retrenchment of the United States from its place in the world. That's already happened to a large extent. And I think recapturing America's place as all of the kind of social capital or soft power that it had accumulated post-World War II would take a generation to restore. If anybody's elected, who would want to restore it? And, I could go on. I'll pause there. But I definitely feel a softening of the separation between church and state.
I don't even know where to start here, because I think what you're saying is super important. There's this massive political power play by people who have control of major institutions. Some of those people are white Christians. As a voting bloc, they've reliably voted for the Republican candidate in every election, forever. So that demographic piece hasn't changed much. I think one of the questions that a number of people have raised is what happened to the whole morals and values thing when it was Clinton, and where did that go when it was Trump? And I think those are key questions to ask and keep asking, but that's different than just the same voting demographic has voted for the Republican candidate all of the time, and that hasn't changed. And then I think I'm actually deeply concerned about the rise of Christian nationalism. And I think it's incredibly important that all of us get right our descriptions about what that is. What I'm thinking about is some of the polling that asks questions like, do you think prayer should come back in schools? And the people answer, yes, that's coded as Christian nationalist. That's a policy question that I don't agree with. I would prefer prayer not to be in schools, but that's not indicative of Christian nationalism.
I agree with that. I would not define that as Christian nationalism.
But yeah, and so that's good. And yet that is out there in some of these polls and some of the public narrative around. So I just think in a moment where this is, to me, a very growing concern, we collectively should be precise about what it is. And then I think it'll be important to build unexpected coalitions to defeat it politically. And what that means, I think, and I'm thinking especially for people who are politically to the left or non-religious, that if this really is an existential threat or a challenge to basic functions of democracy, then now would be a really good time to build as big of a coalition as you can to defeat it. What I worry about from what I read is that at least the National Democratic Party is not doing that. They're not doing the Big Ten outreach. How do we build the biggest coalitions possible to defeat this thing? Instead, they're sometimes painting in very broad brushes about who those people are, and they're continuing to name some issues that are just not going to get the median voter in Ohio. And so I think if descriptively the problem is this growing threat, including from some religious Christian conservatives, then I think the response has to be a big tent pluralistic political response to defeat it electorally. And so maybe that just means triaging different issues for people. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, when I listen to you, I never experience anything you're saying as scary or threatening. Like you just seem always very reasonable to me and very measured. But I code you, like David French, you're a civil libertarian Christian. So like that's really, actually, I think really kind of admirable. Like you're complex. So you have private beliefs, and then you're complex in the way you integrate those private beliefs into what you think, politics should be, the way you think the world should be. But I don't think you're representative of what I read and listen to. I mean, I think, so you're like, okay, I believe these things as a Christian. I'd like you to believe them too, Evan. But I don't think the state should implement those things because it's scary when government starts exercising power. I love that. And I'm open to being persuaded, except about the part about the government getting involved, which I don't think either of us want. That's not what I hear. And you can define Christian nationalism however you want, but I hear something where it's like America is not a civil libertarian democracy. America is a Christian democracy. And it scares the pants off of me.
Oh, it scares me too.
Sure.
And the people making that argument represent a significant voting bloc, at least tens of millions of Americans.
For sure.
And they are incredibly well funded. And as importantly, the communication networks, Christian radio, conservative media, are unbelievably sophisticated and established. So to me, that represents, if you don't want that, and I don't want that either, and if you're committed to a process-based response rather than, a violent response, then the next logical step seems to be build big tent, good faith coalitions of people who otherwise disagree massively about other important issues. But to say in this moment, we have to set some of those differences aside. We have to prioritize common issues, one of the most important of which is going to be to defeat politically this rise of a self-interested, power-grabbing, and harmful political demographic.
Well, I mean, I deeply agree with that, right? So look, in just as we did the ranking of identities, I was like ranking my issues as a voter. And, I think I would have said climate change, income inequality. And I'm like, oh, thank God Kamala Harris supports fracking. Say whatever you need to say, right? Because preservation of civil libertarianism is now trumping concern for me. Yeah, sorry. And I just wouldn't have thought I really would have had to worry about that 10 years ago. I mean, and so I'm totally with you that like we're not there yet. It's not inevitable. There's nothing certain. But I'm worried. Like I wouldn't put my immortal soul on the proposition that America looks the way it does now in 25 years. I hope it does. I think it probably does, but I'm not certain. So I very, very much agree with you about that. It's part of what interests me. Part of what interests me about these conversations so much. And I think the question could be, can we create a world where we can live with each other, even where we really think that maybe we're all wrong?
I like that as a goal as well. Great.
Cross-Examined is hosted by Evan Mandery and John Inazu. This podcast was produced and edited by me, Olivia Schroeder. Today's episode was produced by Perry Wilson and Allison Smith. Music by Nathan Eklund and James Bawley.